All right, so Succession season 4, episode 7, I believe it's called The Tailgate Party. I thought I'd come here and do a spoiler discussion slash review. Let's just get right into it. And I don't want to be harsh because I think Succession is still a very good show, but I think this was probably the weakest episode of the season, and that doesn't mean it's bad. The long wait of a week between episodes, I feel like this didn't move the story as forward as much as some of the previous ones. But in saying that, the good scenes we got in this episode are pretty outstanding. So I thought I'd just go through what I thought were the highlights of this episode and I guess some interesting parallels I picked up on from like previous seasons. Obviously, a lot of the internet's already pointed out that Kendall is very much sounding like his dad now when he says at the start of the episode, everything I'm doing for my kids. It's a lie that Logan used to tell himself.
Okay, I'm breaking my back, and it's all for them. Okay, to make the world safe.
Pretty often, but the idea that Kendall is sort of becoming Logan isn't a particularly new one. Kendall's in an interesting spot because he's sort of flip-flopping from the more savage, assertive, powerful Kendall that we've seen glimpses of that we want to see more of. And he's also bouncing back to self-sabotagey, unlikable Kendall. I think Kendall was clearly framed as the hero of the piece for Succession at the end of season 1 when we sort of got an empathetic view into like the car crash situation.
You're my boy. You're my number one boy.
And then into the end of season 2, he was very much framed as the hero of the piece. And then season 3 was sort of pulling that back and really analyzing whether he has a sort of good guy complex or whether he actually has good intentions. And I guess what's interesting is at the end of season 3, he had that breakdown to his siblings about the boy that he killed or was involved in the manslaughter of. And he broke down sort of saying that he thought he could get his siblings out of this awful position, high stakes world. And it seemed very genuine at the time. It seemed like he actually had his siblings' best emotional interests at heart, which I find weird because now he's sort of, being really cold and savage and, one king, one crown, as he says. He seems very adamant on staking his place and cutting everyone else out, even if it's his siblings. I just found that interesting because, at the end of season 3, he did actually seem really genuine about wanting the best for his siblings, but now doesn't seem as much. Moving forward through the episode, it was really good to see Nate again. Nate probably has one of the best lines in the episode where he says to Kendall that, like, I'm not Gil and you're not Logan. And I think it's good because Nate feels like one of the few characters that's really grown and changed and almost grown out of the petty squabbles that he was exposed to at the start of the show. He feels like a different person and not in like a bad, lazy writing way, as in it feels like he's just focused on himself and he's above the sort of petty squabbling that he was engaging in before. And so I think the fact that he really calls Kendall out and just goes, yeah, you're not Logan. I don't want to engage in this. It's probably best not to be seen around you. Feels like really interesting off-screen character growth. I think Matsson is a definite highlight of this episode. And I loved his introduction. It was just such good comic timing that once Kendall asks for a moment of silence for their dad and the room goes quiet, Matsson sort of bursts in. I also love the body language that Alexander Skarsgård's playing with when he portrays Matsson, particularly in this episode. We've seen him be very alpha and sort of like control his space in a very like almost toxic, masculine sort of way. But now when he's in this like New York triplex, as Kendall describes it, he feels almost overbearing and kind of socially awkward. And it was really interesting when he talks to Shiv how he almost seems insecure about how people are perceiving him, because previously he hasn't seemed to give a shit. I also love the information we're getting about Ebba, and what feels like, honestly, almost gaslighty emotional abuse. That conversation we see where he continuously keeps talking over and saying, It's this communications lady that hates communication while simultaneously speaking for her and not letting her speak. Was really interesting and a very good insight. As you notice, Shiv sort of notices a very good insight into what's clearly a very abusive and toxic workplace. It's little details like that. Like Ebba, we've maybe had 4 minutes on screen with, but she feels like a very well realized character. It feels like the writers have an idea of what she does in her spare time, how she feels about all these people. And I found it very interesting when Kendall and Matsson are facing off where her facial expressions will land in what she was reacting to. We also get the revelation that Matsson has been fudging the subscriber numbers for Gojo in India to a point where in order to rationalize them, there would need to be, quote, a second India. And then he asked Shiv to build him a second India. It's a good revelation. I think the idea that Matsson is full of shit is definitely fun and definitely fits the vibe that they've been playing with. But I also did like Matsson seeming like a really well put together adversary for the Roys. So we'll see how that plays out. But I'm not sure if I'll completely love the idea that Matsson is a complete joke. I'm hoping that he still has some sort of like riz and power behind him. Otherwise, it'll feel like a wet fart of a villain rather than a really powerful one. But again, it depends how the punchlines are, because I did really enjoy the blood bag story from episode 5. So yeah, moving forward, I loved the face-off with Kendall and Matsson, and I think it was good. It was a really good piece of writing and acting, because they're both calling each other out but pretending they like it, but you can feel that they don't. Particularly when Kendall's like, oh man, your fucking numbers, man, like, unbelievable. Like, obviously suggesting that I know you have been fucking with the numbers. But it's like, it's just subtle enough that Matsson feels the threat but also isn't exactly sure of what Kendall knows.
Excited about that. Estimates, estimates.
Yep.
But you, man, your numbers exploding, right? Like, literally unbelievable.
And I feel like, yeah, it's a really well done confrontation, because I actually think Kendall came out really well of that confrontation. Even when he sort of gathered the room and when he put that on a cup, right, it was a very powerful moment for Kendall. And I think he clearly won that encounter, because Matsson almost just goes, oh, let's hug it out, shut the fuck up sort of thing. Like, he wants the conversation to be over because he's getting embarrassed.
Love the deal.
Come on, brother.
Love the deal. Yeah.
That was one of the moments recently where Kendall felt like he was actually sort of having some power and not kind of self-sabotaging. It felt like he won that encounter. And yeah, maybe he took it a bit too far where he said, yeah, biggest overpay in history, because it's like, you don't want to brag that your buyer is overpaying. That's a weird flex. But aside from that, it felt like he actually met Matsson. And you know that because Matsson started resorting to calling their numbers gay.
Well, thank you. And congrats to you as well. Because I hear your numbers are gay.
My numbers are what?
Gay.
My numbers are gay?
Yeah. You had this cute little valuation, and your numbers just came out as gay.
It's kind of homophobic, man.
Like, yeah, Matsson was against the wall. Like, Matsson was losing that fight, and as a result, almost just resorted to like a juvenile name calling of numbers that Kendall projected in the Living Plus episode. Roman was a total, I don't want to say loser this episode, but he really just came off as unlikable, unhinged, and given his upwards trajectory at the start of the season, kind of sad. Jerry completely owned him, and like rightfully so. And that brings us to Shiv and Tom, which is obviously the highlight of the episode. And the reason I say it's obviously the highlight is I must say, I guess, the framing of this episode, despite some really good character introductions, I don't think this is going to be hailed as, oh, remember that episode? No. I think people will go back and remember that scene on the balcony at the end and maybe the Matsson versus Kendall confrontation. But I think this episode lacks the iconography or the sort of big centerpiece staging that previous great episodes of Succession have had. And that's fine. It's a mid-season episode, but when you think of some of the greatest episodes of Succession, you think about the vote of no confidence episode. You think about the yacht slash Kendall calling out Logan episode. You think of a few episodes from season 3, the ones in Italy, the wedding episodes, stuff like that, where there's an event, but the event feels really quite powerful. And if we're talking about election-based slash political-based episodes, we had a really good one in season 3 where Logan was essentially picking who ATN slash most of the media would push for the next presidential candidate. There was that whole section about like, oh, who's going to get me a can of Coke?
Heard you wanted one.
There was that fantastic section where Tom was walking back into the conference hall room, whatever you want to call it, and was sort of just in horror at, I guess, the power this family has and how lost he feels.
Question of overreach. So, yeah, on tech, I mean, the strategy is clear. I hear you about Gojo. I personally don't think there would...
I feel like this episode, yeah, it was a tailgate party or whatever, and they were sort of talking about the election, but initially the premise that was set up about like, oh, we're going to sort of pick our different sides about political parties sort of fell by the wayside, and it was essentially just a reason to have a bunch of characters in a room. And I feel like maybe there could have been a better setting or a more exciting place to do that, or sort of more exciting circumstances to have that happen. Because as it stands, it just felt like a party, and the theme and sort of the other ideas that was set up at the start of the episode didn't really matter. And because really all it was hoping to achieve was Tom gets really tired and then cracks it at Shiv, which is sort of the center point of this episode. That fight with Shiv and Tom, I think, is really good. It's obviously really good acting wise, and they're saying a lot of things, and it's not even funny. It's actually quite hard to watch. And I think Matthew Macfadyen presents a different side. So does Shiv, but particularly Matthew Macfadyen presents a different side of Tom that we haven't seen before. We haven't seen him get this assertive, this worked up, this honestly like angry. And previously he's been either really meek or really snaky. And I think having him be this assertive was kind of exciting to see. But similarly, I think Shiv also went the other direction, where she's previously been very dominant and very strong and very Logan-esque in how she argues. And in this argument, she did feel really quite vulnerable and really sort of hollowed out, and honestly way weaker than Tom did. I think Tom was hitting her with stronger points pretty consistently, and she was sort of just retaliating them. And I think whilst I really appreciate the performances, and I really do appreciate how long the argument went, and there's so many good quotables from that argument, I think previously with Shiv and Tom, I've preferred the more snaky, subdued, subtle nature of it. I think a lot of people are talking about how this needs to be the performance, or this needs to be the scene that goes in their Emmy reel, but I would be lying if I said I didn't think that the end of season 3 had better, more subtle acting, and that's typically what I prefer. But yes, as far as couples fighting, massive scream matches go, you're not going to get many better ones than what we saw at the end of episode 7. It's just a good fight. And I think it throws them to a point that they can't come back from. Previously, we've had arguments where Shiv says, oh, you're never going to leave me, you're way below my league, etc., etc. And we've seen that sting Tom, but I think Tom sort of really went in and went, fuck it, in for a penny, in for a pound. And once it started getting to ugly comments about you wouldn't make a good mother, you were a selfish person, stuff like that, while they may be justified to an extent based on how Tom's being treated, it jumped past sort of fair arguments to make about maybe you wanted to see me sent to prison, blah, 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 blah. And now it's just like, I don't like you as a person. And she says that back to him, and then the conversation sort of ends. So yeah, look, I think it's been 3 years in the making, that argument and that level of blow up. And if you watch the behind the scenes discussion that the actors have, they do actually talk about the fact that like the actors went, oh, well, they haven't actually had a massive blow up. But I don't know, as a Tom fan, I preferred him having a bit more emotional control. But yes, it was good to see. There are a lot of good jabs. I think my favorite line from this episode was when Tom is sucking up to Matsson, and Matsson says like, oh, it feels like you're feeding me shit and telling me it's coconut or something. Good line. But yeah, I think this episode moved the plot forward a bit. We also got that Kendall scene where he basically says, one king, one crown, we're going to fuck over my siblings. And I think this is either going to result in Kendall... From what I gathered, the writers actually said to Kendall in a Shakespearean reference, we want you to essentially embody Richard III, which is a story of someone essentially fucking over all their friends and all their family to get to the top and then being incredibly lonely there. So that means either the trajectory of this season is that Kendall's going to do that and step into power and become the next Logan, or what I would prefer, and I think is more typical, is that Kendall self-destructs. And either one would be interesting to see, but it clearly seems like at this point they're setting up Kendall to start isolating everyone and come for the crown. And I am interested to see where it goes. And I also hope that we get more Matsson. I hope we get like a strong resolution. I think the hard thing is we obviously know this show is ending in 3 or 4 episodes, but when I see scenes of like Ebba and Matsson and Oscar, it feels like that could be a 2-3 long season beef between the Roys and Matsson's crew. That just seems like so much material to mine, and the writers are so good at setting up these sort of side characters in very quick fashions. Like Ebba feels like I said before, Ebba feels like a really well realized character, and I want to see more of her. It's a shame that the show is ending in 3 or 4 episodes. In regards to Connor, I must say I do like Connor as sort of comedic relief, but if we're only like, if this show is ending this season and we only have 3-4 more episodes, I could miss Connor. I'm just being honest. I can do without him, because if the show is going to run for 6 or 7 seasons, yeah, sure, you've got time for like needless comic relief. But unless Connor somehow becomes a major player in this show, it does sometimes feel like wasted time. But maybe that's a hot take. I know a lot of people disagree. I also think that bringing back Rava was cool. And it was cool because this show has a very good tendency to forget about characters and actually bring them up in meaningful ways later. And they did that with Rava, they did that with Marsha, they did that with Nan and Pierce. And they bring these characters back in a way that just feels like a really exciting reward for sort of attentive viewers. But yeah, overall, I thought it was a good episode with really great moments, and I'm excited to see where the show goes from here. Thank you for watching.